The old harbor in Hesperia always smelled of salt and nostalgia. My morning walk was a quiet ritual past the same weathered boats and the fishermen mending their nets. Then down the lane lined with driftwood fences toward my daughter Sienna's little cabin. Routine felt like safety until it didn't. That morning, Tristan's sleek electric car sat in her driveway, a jarring detail I knew shouldn't be there. He was supposed to be 1,000 miles away. I slowed my pace, a cold dread creeping into my bones. The window was slightly ajar, and a whisper of sound escaped. As soon as we finalized the papers, transfer of ownership, my breath caught. My routine had just shattered. If they've ever acted like you weren't there until your absence echoed louder than presence, share your story. And if this feels like your table too, like and subscribe. My name is Elara, and I always believed my life in Hesperia was a series of quiet, predictable rhythms. The mornings began with the sea's breath, a salty mist that clung to the old wooden pilings of the docks before giving way to the sun's first hesitant rays. My walk was a ritual, a path worn into my own memory, each turn and dip as familiar as the lines on my hands. I'd pass the small, family-run bakery whose scent of fresh cinnamon rolls mingled with the crisp sea air, then descend the gentle hill where the old homes stood like silent sentinels, their windows reflecting the changing light. The path led me, as it always did, toward Sienna's small cabin, the one with the porch swing that always hung just a little crooked. My daughter had a knack for finding beauty in imperfection, and I loved that house for it. A small testament to a life lived honestly. The familiarity was a comfort, a blanket I pulled tighter around my shoulders with each step. It was the rhythm of a life well lived, a peace earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. But on this particular morning, a strange chill cut through the air, one that had nothing to do with the cool sea breeze. It came from a sleek, charcoal-gray electric car parked in Sienna's driveway, its modern lines a stark contrast to the rustic charm of the cabin. It was Tristan's car, a new model he had been bragging about for months. He had shown me pictures of it, detailing its features with a boyish excitement I hadn't seen in years, pointing out the eco-friendly aspects and the impressive torque. But he was supposed to be 1,000 miles away, in San Francisco. Consulting on a major tech campus project, he had landed a project he called his big break. His car, still carrying the faint streaks of last week's rain, sat in the driveway like it belonged there, like it was an ordinary part of this morning. And yet, it wasn't. The very sight of it was an intrusion, a dissonant note in the quiet symphony of my day. I slowed down, my feet growing heavy on the gravel path. My first instinct was a primal one to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to not disturb the careful order of the day. My second was a mother's instinct to walk straight up to the door and knock, to call out to my son and ask him what he was doing here, to fill the silence with a mother's gentle scolding and a hug. But I did neither. Instead, I paused at the edge of the walkway, my hands clutching the straps of my purse so tightly my knuckles went white. The blinds were drawn in the living room, a thin barrier between me and the life I thought I knew. Yet, I noticed a small gap at the bottom of the window, the kind of subtle imperfection you only see when you've looked at the same thing for decades. It was a tiny sliver of a flaw, an escape route for sound. My breath caught in my throat. Voices slipped through the gap, muffled by the glass but distinct enough to make me stand perfectly still. A woman's voice, sharp and clear despite the filter of the window, said, "As soon as she signs, we'll transfer everything over." The words hung in the crisp morning air, cold and hard as stone. "The rest is just logistics." I would know that voice anywhere. It was Leo, my daughter-in-law. Her voice had a clinical precision to it, the kind of voice that made you feel like you were being analyzed, not conversed with. There was no warmth, no humanity, just a cold, calculated efficiency. She continued, her tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "She won't question it. She's distracted, tired. She's ready to be guided." My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together, a desperate puzzle with no picture. Paperwork, transfers, guided. The words echoed in my head, each one a hammer blow to my heart. Another voice, deeper, responded. But I couldn't make it out. It might have been Tristan's, but the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears drowned out everything else. I stepped back, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and ducked behind the thick hedge that bordered Sienna's yard. The scent of trimmed boxwood and damp earth filled my senses, a stark, grounding contrast to the whirlwind of panic inside me. I hadn't seen Sienna's car, just Tristan's, and just Leo's words, slick as oil in the morning air. I backed away slowly, carefully, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel. I crossed the street with legs that didn't feel like my own, a hollow feeling spreading in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the familiar comfort of my own porch, where the air no longer felt safe, where my own home now seemed like a fortress under siege, its walls thin and its defenses non-existent. Inside, I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on. The whistle seemed too loud, a piercing sound in the sudden, crushing silence. It was a cry for attention, a call to a world that was no longer what it seemed. I poured tea I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table, the warmth of the mug a foreign sensation in my trembling hands. I had built this life, every brick of it, and in a single moment, a whisper in the wind, it felt like it was being taken from me. I had built it with the late nights working on freelance projects, the early mornings balancing ledgers, the frugal choices that had allowed me to save. The silence in the house pressed harder than any sound ever could, the old wood groaning as it settled into its bones, a sound that now felt like it was trying to tell me something, a warning I was only just beginning to understand. It was trying to tell me that my peace was an illusion, my security a fragile myth. I moved from room to room, a ghost in my own home, touching the things I had once believed were permanent. The small side table in the living room still had a faint chip in its wood from when Tristan, in a fit of sixth-grade triumph, had dropped his science trophy on it. I ran my fingers over the scarred wood, remembering the way his face had lit up with pride, a pure, unadulterated joy that now felt like a cruel memory. The kitchen cabinet had a small dent where Sienna had once tried to climb it to sneak a cookie, her little hands gripping the handle, her eyes wide with mischievous intent. My fingers traced the imperfections, the small scars that told a story of a family I had built with love, sacrifice, and the kind of late nights and early mornings you never announce, you just do. I had gone without so Tristan could go to that architecture camp in Chicago, skipped client lunches so Sienna could take ballet classes. It hadn't felt like sacrifice then, it had felt like motherhood, a privilege, a sacred duty. Now, it felt like a foolish investment in a future that was being stolen from me. I stopped at the hallway wall, lined with frames of memories. Our wedding, sunlit and simple, a day that promised a lifetime of forever. A photo of the kids at Myrtle Beach, their faces covered in sand and joy. A moment so pure it almost hurt to look at. The last one was of Tristan at his university graduation, his arms wide as if to embrace a world he believed was already his. His eyes in that photo were bright, full of promise, and I had been so proud. My fingers hovered near the glass, not quite touching, as if the memory itself could shatter. I had paid for all of it, the education, the lessons, the opportunities with my own sweat and my own savings. I had built a life for them, a foundation of stability and love, and now, it seemed, they were trying to tear it down. But things had been off lately. Just 3 weeks ago, Tristan had asked me, so casually, if I kept the house deed in the safe or with the lawyer. He had said it so smoothly, so nonchalantly, like he was asking for a recipe, a month before that. Leo had mentioned updating my digital signature on the estate paperwork, just in case we ever need to help out fast. Elara, I had brushed it off, grateful for their forethought, thinking it was just their modern way of being responsible. And then there was the time I couldn't find my bank statement folder. I had thought I misplaced it in one of my infrequent moments of senior forgetfulness. Now, sitting in the quiet of my home, a home that felt like it was turning against me, I wasn't so sure. I returned to my office and opened the desk drawer, the key to the fireproof safe where I left it. Tucked in the back beneath old tax forms, the deed was still there, a crisp, official document. But suddenly, its presence didn't feel like a reassurance. It felt like a marker in a race I didn't know I was running. Its presence was not a comfort, but a question. I sat down and opened my laptop. If they were planning something, I needed to know how far it had already gone. I opened my bank's online portal and stared at the recent transactions. There they were, 3 small transfers, all under $500, to a secondary account I didn't recognize. The descriptions were vague: clinical, even consulting, logistics, estate review. I didn't know what they were planning yet, but they were already moving quietly, legally, sloppily, even. I stared at the screen, a new kind of resolve settling over me. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, hard anger, a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow, I would call someone who didn't smile when they lied, someone who could see the world as it was, not as I wanted it to be. The tea in my cup was now cold, the silence in the house, once a comfort, was now a threat. My peaceful routine had been shattered, and a new, more dangerous rhythm was about to begin. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling as I dialed the number of an old lawyer friend, Mark. My heart ached for my daughter, Sienna, but I couldn't risk involving her. Mark, now retired, was the only person I could think of who wasn't family, who had the shrewd, legal mind I so desperately needed. He was a gruff man of habit, but his sense of justice had always been unwavering. His familiar voice answered, "Elara, everything okay?" I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat, and told him everything: Tristan's car, the overheard whispers, the disturbed documents, and the small, strange transfers in my bank account. Mark listened patiently. His silence was more comforting than words, a quiet authority of a man who had seen it all. When I finished, he sighed. "Elara," he said softly, "I've seen this playbook before. They're testing the waters, seeing if you're paying attention." He explained the small transfers were a subtle form of financial grooming, designed to build a case that I was unfit to manage my own affairs. It was a slow, deliberate erosion of my independence, a poison drip of deceit. "The next step," he warned, his voice turning grave, "is probably to get you to sign something, a power of attorney. Maybe something that gives them control." Leo's cold, calculating face flashed in my mind. Along with her chilling words, "She's ready to be guided." My blood ran cold. I was no longer just a mother, I was a target. "What do?" I whispered, feeling vulnerable and small, a ship adrift in a suddenly hostile sea. Mark's voice became firm and professional, the old lawyer snapping back to life. "First, change all your passwords, every single one. Second, stop talking to them about your finances. If they ask about your will, say it's handled, give them nothing. And third, you need a good lawyer, one who specializes in estate law and elder abuse." The phrase elder abuse hit me hard, a painful echo of the fear that had been gnawing at me. The undeniable facts, the transfers, the lies confirmed his words. I had to face the reality of my situation, as ugly as it was. We spoke for an hour. He walked me through a few basic things I could do on my own, like documenting every interaction I had with Tristan and Leo, no matter how small. He told me to start a daily journal, a written record of my days, my thoughts, and my conversations. It would be my personal log, my unassailable truth in a world of their lies. When I hung up, the world felt both clearer and infinitely more dangerous. The fog of doubt had lifted, replaced by a cold, hard understanding of the threat I faced. I meticulously followed his advice. I changed every password, creating complex, illogical combinations. I locked my fireproof safe and hid the key in a place I was certain no one would ever find. I wasn't just protecting my assets, I was protecting myself, my identity. I was going to fight for my own destiny. The next day, a package from Tristan arrived. Inside was a sleek black smart speaker, a Trojan horse designed to spy on me. His note read, "Thought this would make your life easier. Mom, just say the word." My heart sank. This wasn't a gift of convenience, it was a digital invasion. I sent a simple, placid text. "Thank you, honey. It's a wonderful surprise." I could almost feel their collective sigh of relief, their misplaced confidence in my naivety. They were wrong. They thought they had a foothold, but all they had was a box on my kitchen counter, a monument to their deceit. My life became a performance, a constant act of deception. I had to embody the part of a slightly forgetful, aging mother, easily distracted and ready to be guided. I let the house become a little more cluttered, left my glasses on the kitchen table, and made small, deliberate mistakes in conversation, feigning gentle confusion. It was an exhausting mental chess match, but a necessary one. They were watching, and I had to give them a performance they would believe. 3 days later, Leo called, her voice, sharp and devoid of warmth, demanded, Tristan tells me you received the smart speaker. Are you finding it helpful? We can walk you through the setup, of course. It was an offer of help disguised as a subtle demand for access, a way for her to assert control. I laughed softly, a gentle, practiced sound. Oh, bless you, dear. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I'll get around to it. No need to worry. I could hear the subtle shift in her tone, the frustration in her voice. I hung up and walked over to the speaker. I didn't plug it in. Instead, I took a sticky note and wrote a single word, no. I stuck it to the side of the box. A silent, personal protest against their digital intrusion. A small yet powerful act of defiance. I had been told to be careful, to be patient, and to build my case. I would find a lawyer, a good one, and gather my evidence. I was no longer a victim. I was a protagonist. My tranquil life was not an illusion. It was a prize worth fighting for. The day I met Mr. Thompson, the lawyer Mark had recommended, the sky was the color of a bruised plum. His office, smelling of old books and dust, felt like a comforting refuge, a place where justice had been fought for and won. He was a small, thin man with a shock of white hair and wise, owlish spectacles. I told him everything again, from the beginning. I shared the details of Tristan's car, the overheard conversation, the untouched coffee, the disturbed documents, the small transfers, the smart speaker, and my newfound act of feigned confusion. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. Mrs. Elara, he said calmly, what you have is not just a suspicion, it's a pattern. They're not just trying to take your money, they're trying to take your life. He explained the transfers were financial grooming, the smart speaker a modern spy game, and the disturbed documents a fishing expedition for weaknesses. He laid out a legal strategy, a plan as meticulous as it was brilliant. First, we secure your assets. We'll make your will airtight with a clause that any inheritance is contingent on you being of sound mind. This will make it very difficult for them to challenge it. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and relief. Second, we'll create a legal paper trail. We'll send them a letter stating that all future communications must go through me. This will force them to show their hand. His words felt like a call to arms, a battle plan. I left his office with a renewed sense of purpose, a steely resolve I hadn't felt in years. I was not alone. I had an ally. I was ready for the fight. A week later, Tristan and Leo showed up unannounced. A manila envelope in Tristan's hand, my heart pounded in my chest. Hey, Mom, Tristan said, a forced, bright tone in his voice. We brought some paperwork. It's just a simple power of attorney, so we can handle a few things for you if you ever get too tired. His words were a subtle jab at my age, an insult veiled as concern. I put on my best performance. I held the papers at a distance, feigning failing eyesight. Oh, honey, I said with a gentle, confused smile. This looks so complicated. I don't know if I can make heads or tails of it. What do you think? Dear, do you think I should have Mark look it over? The names hung in the air like a small bomb, a perfectly timed and executed maneuver. The mask on Leo's face cracked, a flicker of pure rage. Mark, she said, her voice too sharp, too full of venom. I thought he was retired. You should have a proper lawyer. Tristan's smile faltered, a look of confusion and betrayal in his eyes. He wasn't the master manipulator, he was a pawn, and in that moment, he realized it. I held my ground. Oh, bless you, dear, I said, full of fake confusion. I'll get around to it. Now, why don't you stay for a cup of tea? They left without a word, their carefully constructed lies crumbling around them. As I watched them drive off, I saw not imposters, but two lost souls who had chosen greed over family. I had won the first battle. My life, my quiet home, was a prize, and I would fight to keep it. My heart still ached from the confrontation with Tristan and Leo. The victory felt hollow, tinged with a deep, unsettling sadness. It was one thing to fight strangers, but to fight my own son felt like a war I had already lost. A few days later, a strange twist of fate occurred. I was at the local grocery store, the very one I used to frequent with my husband. When I saw her, Sienna, my sweet, Honest Sienna, standing in the produce aisle, her face a mask of worry. She was talking on the phone, her voice a hushed whisper, a nervous energy radiating from her. I instinctively hid behind a display of apples, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to face her. Not yet, not until I knew. Was she a part of this? Was my own daughter, the light of my life, a part of the strange wind that was trying to blow my life apart? I watched as she hung up the phone, a deep sigh escaping her lips. She looked lost, a small ship adrift in a suddenly hostile sea. My heart, already bruised, ached for her. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her everything was going to be okay, but I couldn't. Not yet, not until I knew. I followed her to her car, a small quiet sedan that was a stark contrast to Tristan's flashy sports car. I watched as she put the groceries in the trunk, her movements slow and deliberate. She got in the car, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked at the rearview mirror and our eyes met. Her eyes, so much like my own, widened in surprise, a look of pure shock on her face. I didn't smile, I didn't wave, I just stood there, a silent statue in the parking lot. She drove off, a cloud of dust in her wake, and I was left alone, a new wave of doubt washing over me. A few days later, Sienna called. Her voice, usually so bright and full of life, was now laced with a subtle anxiety. "Mom," she began without a preamble, "I saw you at the grocery store. Why did you just stand there? Are you okay?" Her words were a lifeline, a chance for me to tell her everything, but I couldn't. Not yet. I was still a prisoner of my own fears, a captive of my own doubts. "Oh, bless you, dear," I said, my voice full of a practiced confusion. "I'm afraid I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I just got a little lost in thought. You know how I am." I could hear the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her tone, the frustration in her voice. "Mom," she said again, her voice a little more firm this time. "Tristan and Leo are worried about you. They said you've been a little forgetful. They think you should move in with them. Just for a little while." My blood ran cold. The net was closing in. The truth, the horrible, terrifying truth, was now staring me in the face. My own daughter, the person I had trusted with my life, was now a part of the plot. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling, and walked over to the smart speaker. Still sitting on my kitchen counter, the sticky note, with the single word "no" on it, was now a symbol of my resolve. I was not alone anymore. I had an ally in Mr. Thompson. I had a plan. I was not a victim. I was a warrior. My peace was a prize, and I would fight to keep it. The world I had built was not an illusion. It was my reality, and I would not let them take it from me. The strange wind was now a storm, and I was ready to face it. The week after the unsettling phone call with Sienna, I knew I needed to get out of the house. The walls felt like they were closing in, a silent accomplice to the plot unfolding around me. I made a point to visit my niece, Maya, at her studio. She was a talented painter, and the creative energy of her space, filled with the scent of turpentine and the vibrant chaos of her canvases, was a much-needed balm for my frayed nerves. She was working on a large mural for a local coffee shop, her face splattered with tiny dots of color, completely absorbed in her art. Her daughter, my 8-year-old granddaughter, Lily, was at a small table, drawing with crayons. "Grandma Elara," she squealed, jumping up to hug me. The innocent embrace felt like a warm, comforting blanket, a brief reprieve from the cold reality of my life. "Look what Uncle Tristan gave me, it's our new house," she announced, her voice full of pure, unadulterated joy. My heart sank to the floor, a lead weight in my chest. Lily held up a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, but the meaning was brutally clear. It was a large, 2-story house with a sprawling yard. In the front, stick figures of Tristan and Leo stood smiling, but there was no figure of me, no figure of Maya, and no figure of Lily. The house was theirs, and theirs alone, in a shaky child's handwriting at the bottom. It read, "Our new home." I forced a smile, my lips feeling like they were made of stone. "That's a very nice drawing, sweetie," I said, my voice a hollow echo of my true feelings. I fought back the tears, a sudden, blinding wave of pain washing over me. This was the one piece of evidence I had dreaded finding the most. A child's drawing, a child's innocence used as a weapon, a testament to their greed. I hugged Lily, the little girl's warmth a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality of the betrayal. I left Maya's studio feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. The drawing, that innocent, heartbreaking drawing, was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my home, my family, my identity. It was about them trying to erase me from the picture. With a new sense of purpose, I knew I needed to take action. I needed a different kind of help, a more discreet kind of help. I couldn't risk a confrontation, a legal battle in the court of public opinion. I needed answers, not a fight. I needed proof, not just for a judge, but for myself. I found myself dialing another number, one that I hadn't called in years. It was the number of a man named Jake, a gruff, retired private investigator who had been a good friend of my late husband. He was a man of few words, but his reputation for finding what was hidden was legendary. His voice, a low, gravelly rumble, answered, "Elara, it's been a long time." I didn't beat around the bush. "Jake, I need your help. I don't want to battle. I don't want to confront anyone. I just need to know. I need evidence. I need to be sure." I told him about the suspicious transfers, the smart speaker, the disturbed documents, and the innocent, devastating drawing. He listened intently, his silence, much like Mark's, a comforting presence. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "They're circling, Elara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "They're not just trying to take your money, they're trying to take your life. I'll need access to your bank statements, your digital footprint. I'll need to see if they've been running background checks on you. If they've been talking to your doctor, it's a messy business, but I'll find what you're looking for." I knew then that I had made the right decision. This wasn't about a lawyer anymore. This was about a silent, careful excavation of the truth. This was about finding the proof I needed, not for a judge, but for myself. I left Jake's office with a new sense of resolve, a steely determination that had been missing since this whole ordeal began. The pieces were falling into place. The truth, as painful as it might be, was within my reach. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior, a mother fighting for her home, for her peace, and for her very identity. And I was going to win. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet, echoing home, the weight of my husband's absence felt heavier than usual. It was a profound, aching emptiness that had been a constant companion since he passed. I found myself drawn to his old study, a room I had barely entered since his death, fearing the ghosts it held. As I ran my hand along the spine of his old books, my fingers brushed against a small, worn leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of encyclopedias. It wasn't his daily planner, but a private journal he kept only for special thoughts and memories. My heart pounded as I opened it, the pages brittle with age. I found a page with a date from years ago, a few months before he was diagnosed. "I'm worried about Tristan," he had written, his handwriting a familiar, elegant scrawl. "His spending habits are out of control. I've tried to talk to him, but he just brushes me off. I've made some provisions in the trust to protect Elara. I just hope she never has to use them." There was a note to himself, a code only he and I knew, to a hidden compartment in his old desk. I raced to the desk, my hands fumbling with the familiar lock. Inside, I found a small cassette tape, a piece of technology so old it felt alien. There was a label on it, in his handwriting, "For Elara in case of a strange wind." My breath hitched. He had foreseen this. He had known, somehow, that this day might come. My husband, even in death, was still watching over me, still protecting me. I took the tape to Jake the next day, the gruff, old detective, a man who had seen the worst of humanity, looked at the old cassette with a kind of reverence. "Your husband was a smart man, Elara," he said, a rare note of warmth in his voice. He knew what was coming. This isn't just evidence. This is a weapon. I nodded, my eyes stinging with tears. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about love, about a promise kept. This was about a man who had loved his family so much that he had prepared for a betrayal he never thought would come. I left Jake's office with a new sense of resolve, a steely determination that had been missing since this whole ordeal began. The pieces were falling into place. The truth, as painful as it might be, was within my reach. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior, a mother fighting for her home, for her peace, and for her very identity. And I was going to win. A few days later, Jake called me. His voice was all business, no pleasantries. Elara, I've got something for you. It's about Leo. He told me he'd been running some deep background checks, looking for patterns, looking for anything that might reveal a motive beyond simple greed. Leo has a history, he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. A checkered past, years ago. She was involved in a similar situation, an elderly man, wealthy, with a new will and a new power of attorney that left her everything. He died shortly after. He paused, letting the words sink in. The case was dropped, no charges were filed, but the circumstantial evidence was damning. It was a whisper in the legal community, a dirty secret that was never officially investigated. This isn't her first time at the rodeo? Elara, she's a professional. The news hit me like a physical blow, a cold, hard truth that made my stomach churn. I had always suspected Leo was the driving force, the cold, calculating mind behind the plot. But to know she had a history of preying on the vulnerable, a history of this exact kind of deceit, solidified my fears. She wasn't just a greedy daughter-in-law, she was a predator. This was my Achilles heel, as Jake called it. It was the leverage I needed, the secret I could use, not to destroy her, but to protect myself. The information was a powerful tool, a shield against their malice, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it. The very next morning, the bell rang. It was Tristan and Leo, their faces a carefully constructed mask of concern. Behind them stood a tall, distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored suit. "Mom," Tristan said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "This is Mr. Harrison. He's a financial advisor, a friend of ours. We're worried about you, about your finances. We thought a professional opinion would be helpful." The trap was sprung. They were escalating, using a man with a respected reputation to subtly cast doubt on my mental faculties. They were trying to build a case that I was losing my grip. I put on my best performance yet, the confused, aging mother who was easily distracted. I welcomed them in, offering them tea and cookies, my hands trembling ever so slightly as I poured. I let my voice waver a little as I spoke, my words punctuated with gentle, practiced confusion. "Oh, bless you, dear. It's so thoughtful of you to worry about me. I'm afraid I don't know much about finances. My dear husband handled all that." I watched as Mr. Harrison, the man they had brought in to testify against me, subtly shifted his gaze, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had been expecting a woman who was frail, incoherent, and easily manipulated. He had not been expecting a woman who was simply, charmingly, confused. He had not been expecting me. I held my ground, meeting his gaze with a steady, unwavering look of my own, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the chess match we were all playing. I was not a victim. I was a warrior. My peace was a prize, and I would fight to keep it. A few days later, a small package arrived from Jake. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a flash drive. It was a digital ghost, a silent witness to a conversation I was not meant to hear. I plugged it into my old laptop, the one I hadn't used in years, and sat alone in my husband's study, the quiet sanctuary of my past. My hands shook as I clicked the file. A simple MP3, the sound of a muffled conversation filled the room. The voices of Leo and her lawyer. "The doctor's report is a little weak," Leo's voice, sharp and devoid of warmth, hissed from the speaker. "She's sharp as a tack sometimes. We need to create a pattern, a paper trail of her confusion. The smart speaker is a start. We'll get her to sign a new power of attorney, claiming it's for her convenience, and then we'll introduce the new will." Her voice was a cold, calculating stream of poison. I could almost hear the smile in her words as she described me, her own mother-in-law, as that frail old woman who can't tell a checkbook from a comic book. The lawyer's voice, a dry, legalistic drone, was just as chilling. "We need to establish a narrative of cognitive decline, small, manageable transfers, little moments of forgetfulness that we can document. The guardianship hearing will be a formality." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, listening to them plot my demise, my very identity, as if I were a stock to be sold, a house to be flipped. The fear that had been gnawing at me was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't a game. It was a war, and they had just given me their battle plan. The revised will they spoke of wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a physical threat, a document designed to erase me from the history of my own life. I spent the next morning at the bank, a place that had always felt like a simple chore, but now felt like a battlefield. I walked in, my head held high, a quiet confidence radiating from me. I met with the bank manager, a kind-faced woman named Sarah who had known my family for years. I explained in a calm, measured voice that I was changing all my account information. Passwords, PINs, security questions, everything. I signed new agreements, carefully reading every line, ensuring there were no loopholes. I opened a new private account, a ghost account that was off the books, with a new name. It was my secret weapon, my private reserve of strength. I wasn't just protecting my money, I was protecting my legacy. I wasn't doing it with anger or with tears. I was doing it with the quiet authority of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. As I left the bank, I smiled. It was a genuine smile, a small yet powerful. Victory, Tristan and Leo, in their arrogance, still thought they were winning. They still thought they held all the cards. They still thought I was a frail, confused old woman. But I wasn't. I was a warrior, and the war had just begun. My home, my peace, my very identity, they were a prize. And I would fight to keep them, not with anger, but with a quiet, powerful grace. The phone rang that afternoon. It was Tristan. His voice, uncharacteristically sweet, asked if I would be free for a visit with him and Leo. "We just want to spend some quality time with you. Mom, we're a little worried about you. That's all." I could hear the carefully rehearsed lie, the false concern, and a small bitter laugh escaped me. "Oh, bless you, honey," I said, my voice full of a practiced confusion. "Of course, come on by. I'll make sure there's fresh lemonade." I was playing my part, the aging matriarch who was easily swayed, easily manipulated. I was giving them the performance they so desperately wanted to see. I was giving them hope. When they arrived, I watched them from the window. They were a study in contrasts. Tristan, my son, my flesh and blood, looked haggard, a strange tension in his shoulders that I had never seen before. Leo, on the other hand, looked perfectly composed, her face a serene mask, her eyes sharp and calculating. They were a team, a well-oiled machine of deceit. As they walked up the driveway, I noticed Leo carrying a small manila envelope, a familiar sight that sent a chill down my spine. The revised will, they were moving in for the kill. I greeted them at the door with a warm smile. "Tristan, my boy Leo, dear, how lovely to see you." I hugged Tristan, the physical act a profound betrayal to my heart, a painful reminder of the son he once was. I offered them seats in the living room, a room that, in my feigned confusion, was now slightly cluttered. I offered them coffee. But Leo, with a subtle shake of her head, declined. "We don't want to overstimulate you, Mom," she said, her voice a cruel caricature of a concerned daughter. I let them talk, my head tilted to the side, my eyes unfocused, a picture of gentle confusion. I let them present their case, their carefully constructed narrative of my supposed decline. "We've been talking to your financial advisor, Mom," Tristan began, a small lie he thought I would never notice. "He thinks it would be best for us to take over your finances, just for a little while. You know it would take a lot of pressure off you." He pulled the manila envelope from the table, a paper weapon in his hands. "We have the new power of attorney right here. It's just a simple signature. Mom, nothing to worry about." He pushed the document across the table, a silent threat, a legal noose they were trying to put around my neck. I picked up the pen, my hands trembling a little, but it was not from fear. It was from the sheer audacity of their plan, the cold, calculated evil of their deceit. I looked at the document, the bold letters a testament to their greed. I looked at Tristan, my son, a stranger in a familiar body. I looked at Leo, the puppet master, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. I smiled a small, sad smile, a silent goodbye to the son I once knew. "Oh, bless you, honey," I said, my voice full of a gentle, practiced confusion. "This is so thoughtful of you, but I'm afraid I can't sign anything without my husband." I let the words hang in the air, a small, yet powerful, bomb in their carefully constructed world. The blood drained from Tristan's face. Leo's mask cracked, a flicker of pure rage in her eyes. "Your husband is dead, Elara," she hissed, the politeness gone, the predator emerging. He's been dead for 10 years. I met her gaze with a steady, unwavering look of my own, my eyes clear and sharp, the feigned confusion gone. "Oh, bless you, dear," I said, my voice now a cold, hard steel. "I know he is, but I still can't sign anything without his signature." The silence in the room was deafening, a testament to the lie I had just created, a lie that had just won me the war. I watched them leave, their faces a mask of pure shock, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. They had expected a weak, frail old woman. They had not expected a warrior. As I watched them drive off, I smiled, not with joy, but with a quiet, powerful grace. They had thought they were winning. They had thought they had all the cards. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten that they were dealing with a woman who had a secret weapon, her quiet, unassuming strength, my home, my peace, my very identity. They were a prize, and I was going to keep them, not with anger, but with a quiet, powerful grace. The war had just begun, and I was going to win. The very next day, I started receiving phone calls. It wasn't Tristan or Leo, but old friends and acquaintances. "Elara, dear, I heard you're not feeling well," one said, her voice dripping with pity. "Tristan told me you've been a little forgetful lately. Maybe you should take it easy." The rumors had begun. They were spreading their poison, not with a legal document, but with a whisper campaign. They were trying to paint me as frail, senile, and incapable of managing my own life. I knew this was their next move, their attempt to isolate me, to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't going to let them. My voice, when I spoke, was sharp and clear, a testament to my mental acuity. "Not at all. Dear, I've never felt better, and my memory is as sharp as ever. Tristan must have misunderstood. I was a warrior, and I was not going to let them win. My home, my peace, my very identity, they were a prize, and I would fight to keep them, not with anger, but with a quiet, powerful grace." As I sat down with Jake to discuss their next moves, he placed a file on the table. It was about Tristan. "I've been digging deeper into your son's past," he said, a grim look on his face. "This isn't just about his spending habits. Years ago, before he met Leo, he was involved in a small embezzlement scheme at a local charity. The case was quietly dismissed, but the records are still there." A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I had always known my son had a reckless side, a tendency to live beyond his means, but to know he had a history of criminal behavior was a new, devastating blow. This wasn't about a greedy son trying to get his inheritance. This was about a man with a dangerous past, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. That night, as I sat alone in my husband's study, I looked at his old desk. The cassette tape, a piece of technology so old it felt alien, was still sitting there. I picked it up, a wave of profound emotion washing over me. For Elara, in case of a strange wind. He had foreseen this. He had known, somehow, that this day might come. My husband, even in death, was still watching over me, still protecting me. I put the tape in an old tape recorder, a forgotten relic in my house. I pressed play and his voice filled the room, a warm, comforting sound from the past. It was a message about the love he had for me, and about a secret. "Elara, my love," his voice said, a little raspy from age. "If you are listening to this, it means you've found the journal. I know you will be confused. I know you will be scared. But I also know you are the strongest woman I have ever known. The truth, my love, is hidden in plain sight. Look at my favorite painting, the one of the lighthouse. The painting is not what it seems. The truth, my love, is in the light." My breath hitched. He had not only left me a clue, but a piece of himself. A final act of love, a final act of protection. The war had just begun, and I was going to win. A week passed, a silent, tense time where the world seemed to hold its breath. The phone, once a constant source of their manipulative calls, had fallen silent. This stillness, however, wasn't a sign of retreat. It was the calm before the storm. A strategic pause while Tristan and Leo regrouped and plotted their next. More aggressive move. I knew this. I felt it in my bones. A cold premonition that settled deep in my core. Every morning, I would walk through the house, touching the furniture my husband and I had picked out, running my hand along the worn spine of a book, my mind a fortress of memories and resolve. They had underestimated me once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. This time, they would be more careful, more subtle, and far more dangerous. One afternoon, the phone rang, shattering the fragile peace of the house. The caller ID flashed Leo's name, a name that now felt like a curse. I took a deep breath, the scent of lavender from the garden filling the air, and answered. Her voice, sweet and laced with a false concern, floated through the line. Elara, she began, using my first name, a subtle sign of her changing tactics, a pretense of intimacy that made my skin crawl. We've been so worried about you. Tristan and I were just talking and we thought, why don't we just talk? Just the three of us. No lawyers, no documents, just family. She suggested a small quiet cafe, a neutral ground, a place where their pretense of civility could flourish. I knew it was a trap, a final, desperate attempt to get me to a place where they could try to break me down without a paper trail. I agreed, my voice calm and steady. I'll be there, I said. A quiet promise of a confrontation they weren't fully prepared for. The cafe was a sanctuary of tranquility, a small quiet place where the scent of roasted coffee and old books hung in the air like a comforting blanket. I arrived first, choosing a table in the back, a strategic position where I could see everyone who came in and no one could easily corner me. I ordered a cup of Earl Grey tea, its warmth a steadying force against the cold dread in my stomach. As I held the warm mug, my hands were steady, a testament to the calm I had cultivated over the past weeks. A few minutes later, Tristan and Leo walked in. They were a study in contrasts. Tristan, my son, wore a carefully constructed mask of genuine worry, his eyes filled with a sad, pleading look that tugged at the old, broken pieces of my heart. But it wasn't real. It was a performance. Leo, on the other hand, was all business. Her eyes darting around the room, assessing every detail, every potential threat. They sat across from me, their presence a cold weight in the warm, cozy atmosphere. Mom, Tristan began, his voice soft and gentle, a tone he hadn't used with me in years. We're just so worried about you, the calls we've been getting, the things people are saying. We think it's time to get you some help, for your own safety. They launched into their practiced routine, their words a carefully constructed lie they had rehearsed 1,000 times. They talked about my forgetfulness, the time I couldn't find my keys, a minor lapse they had inflated into a symptom of cognitive decline. They spoke of my disorganized house, twisting the natural clutter of a life lived into a sign of neglect. They repeated the phrase, need for care, over and over, trying to build a narrative of my frailty not for a judge, but for me. They wanted to break me down, to make me doubt myself, to convince me that they were right. I just smiled, a small, knowing smile, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. My silence, my calm, was my greatest weapon. When they finally stopped, exhausted from their own performance, a profound, heavy silence filled the air. I looked at them, my eyes clear and sharp, the feigned confusion gone. I placed my mug on the table, the small clink of ceramic a sharp punctuation to the silence. I know what you're doing, I said, my voice quiet but firm, the words a hammer blow to their carefully constructed world. And I have evidence. The masks on their faces crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fear. It was over. The game had just ended. The courtroom was a cold, sterile room, a place of reason and law, a stark contrast to the emotional, chaotic world I had been living in. Tristan and Leo, flanked by their expensive lawyer, sat on one side, their faces a picture of smug confidence. They had no idea what was coming. I sat on the other side, a small, unassuming woman with a quiet confidence that radiated from me. Their lawyer, a slick, professional man with a condescending smile, began their case. He painted a picture of me as a frail, confused old woman, a victim of my own age. He presented carefully edited phone calls, selective quotes from my conversations, and the drawing from my granddaughter, Lily, a devastating piece of evidence they had twisted for their own gain. They called my so-called friends, the ones Leo had manipulated, to the stand one by one. They testified to my supposed forgetfulness and frailty. They had built a mountain of lies, a carefully constructed narrative of my decline. Just as their lawyer was about to rest his case, a side door opened and my niece, Maya, walked in. Her face was a picture of controlled rage, and in her hand was a thick manila envelope. She walked straight to my lawyer, who nodded at her. a silent signal of a plan well executed. Maya's testimony was a hammer blow to their case. She presented a series of emails and text messages from Tristan, conversations where he openly discussed his frustration with my stubbornness and his plan to get me to sign the power of attorney. In one email, he even mentioned his plan to use Lily's drawing as a little emotional leverage. Tristan's face, once so smug, was now a mask of pure horror, the realization of his betrayal dawning on him. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand, my head held high. I looked at the judge, a woman with kind, intelligent eyes, and I looked at Tristan and Leo, their faces a picture of smug confidence. I looked at them, and I smiled. My lawyer, a young, brilliant woman I had hired at Jake's recommendation, began my case. She played the first piece of evidence, the flash drive, the cold. Calculating voices of Leo and her lawyer filled the room, their plot, their carefully constructed lie, laid bare for all to hear. The room was silent, a profound, heavy silence that spoke of shock and disbelief. Then, my lawyer presented the second piece of evidence, my personal doctor's report. It was a comprehensive report, a testament to my mental and physical health, a direct contradiction to their entire case. The report was a weapon, a final nail in their coffin. Then came the final piece of evidence, a profound and personal one. My lawyer took the small worn cassette tape and, with the court's permission, played it. My husband's voice filled the room, a warm, comforting sound from the past. He didn't just talk about money, he talked about love, about his profound love for me, and about a secret. He described his concerns about Tristan, about his reckless spending. And then, a code only he and I knew. The truth, my love, is in the light, his voice said, and my lawyer presented the court with a high-resolution image of my husband's painting of the lighthouse. The judge, her face a picture of grim satisfaction, struck down their case, their lies, their greed, their carefully constructed narrative. It all came crashing down around them. As the judge's gavel hit the wood, a final definitive sound, I looked at Tristan and Leo, their faces a picture of utter defeat. The war had just ended, and I had won. Not with anger, but with a quiet, powerful grace. My home, my peace, my very identity, they were a prize, and I had fought to keep them, and I had won. The gavel's final, resounding thwack echoed in the stunned silence, a sound that seemed to physically break the carefully constructed world Tristan and Leo had built. As the judge delivered her final words, a cold finality to an ordeal that had consumed my life for months. I didn't look at them. My eyes were fixed on the small, unassuming cassette tape on the evidence table, a small piece of plastic holding a lifetime of love and a truth that had been buried for too long. My husband's voice, a ghost from the past, still lingered in the air, a final testament to a life lived with integrity. The victory tasted like dust. It wasn't the sweet, satisfying triumph I had imagined. It was a heavy, melancholic relief, the kind you feel after a long, painful illness has finally passed. A quiet sob, barely audible, broke the spell. It was Maya. She was standing in the back of the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutched tightly over her mouth. The anger I had seen on her face earlier, the controlled rage that had fueled her testimony, was gone, replaced by a raw, painful grief. The room began to empty, a slow, solemn procession of people who had just witnessed the dismantling of a family. Tristan and Leo, their faces ashen, were escorted out by their lawyer, their silence a stark contrast to their earlier bravado. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a feeling of profound emptiness settling in my chest. A hand touched my arm, and I turned to see my lawyer, her face filled with a gentle, professional pride. "We did it, Elara," she said, her voice soft. "It's over." But it wasn't over. Not for me, not for Maya. I watched her walk towards me, her steps hesitant, her eyes never leaving mine. Her face, so much like her mother's, was a mirror of my own pain. When she reached me, she didn't say a word. She just wrapped her arms around me, a tight, desperate embrace that spoke of months of unspoken fear and guilt. I held her just as tightly, burying my face in her shoulder, the familiar scent of her hair a sudden comfort. "I'm so sorry, Elara," she finally whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew something was wrong. I saw the emails, the messages. I didn't know how to stop it." My heart, which had been a cold, hollow drum for weeks, finally began to beat again. I pulled away just enough to look at her, to see the sincerity in her eyes. "You don't have to apologize, my love," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You did more than enough. You came here, you spoke the truth. That's all that matters." I wiped a tear from her cheek, my hand trembling slightly. "You were protecting me in your own way, and protecting you, protecting Lily. That was the whole point of this. Everything I did to keep a safe place for you, a future for you both. That's what this fight was truly about." We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, the quiet of the courtroom filled with the unspoken words of a family torn apart and slowly, tentatively, beginning to heal in that moment. I understood that the victory wasn't about the money or the house. It was about reclaiming the truth, about standing up for what was right, and about finding each other again. We walked out of the courtroom hand in hand, the sun warm on our faces, the world outside no longer feeling so cold. My life, which had felt like it was on a single linear track, had just turned a sharp, unexpected corner, and I knew, in that moment, that this new path was one I would walk with Maya, and with a trust that was stronger and more profound than it had ever been. A new beginning. The week that followed was a quiet storm of paperwork and emotional catharsis. My lawyer, the young, brilliant woman who had become a trusted ally, guided me through the legal aftermath. One afternoon in her cozy, book-lined office, we sat down to a task that felt both daunting and liberating: drafting a new will. The old will, the one that had become a weapon in the hands of my son, was now a relic of a life that no longer existed. I looked at the clean white page, a blank canvas for a new future. My first decision was easy: the house, the home my husband and I had built, would go to Maya. She had always loved the place, finding joy in its imperfections and its history. She had fought for its very existence. And now, it would be hers, a symbol of her strength and her loyalty. "It's what your father would have wanted," I told her later that evening, my voice filled with a quiet certainty. A trust fund would be established for Lily, a secure future for my granddaughter, a way to ensure she would never have to be a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The money would be there for her education, for her dreams, for a life of her own, free from the shadow of greed. The rest of my assets, the small fortune I had built with my own sweat and tears, would be divided according to my wishes, a final act of ownership over a life they had tried so hard to steal. After the documents were signed, the ink a final, definitive mark on a new chapter, I left the lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't drive home. Instead, I drove to the one place that had always offered me a sense of peace: the beach. The air was cool and crisp, a gentle breeze coming in from the ocean, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. I took off my shoes and socks, rolling up the cuffs of my trousers, and walked onto the sand. The warm grains of sand, still holding the sun's heat, felt like a grounding presence under my bare feet. The waves, a constant, rhythmic force, crashed against the shore, each one washing away a piece of the pain, the anger, the betrayal. I walked for a long time, the wind whipping through my hair, a feeling of profound peace settling over me. The past was behind me, a series of painful memories I had faced and overcome. The future was not a predetermined path, but an open sea of possibilities. I had a daughter who loved me, a granddaughter who was safe, and a new sense of purpose. I had fought a war and won, not with anger or bitterness, but with a quiet, powerful grace. My home was a sanctuary again. My peace was my own again. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in a breathtaking palette of oranges and purples, I turned and walked back, leaving a single line of footprints in the sand. A new chapter had begun, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it.